All right. Hi, everybody. How we doing? Excellent. Thanks for coming to cool off with us here in the auditorium. To close out day two of our symposium, Automotive History Live, many of you know our speaker. We're welcoming back a storyteller who has made a career out of uncovering the remarkable tales hidden inside forgotten machines. Tom Cotter, author, explorer, and the man behind some of the most beloved barn find stories in the automotive world, presents A Barn Find Life. Now, Tom's work reminds us that every neglected or long-lost car carries a human story. Families, dreams, mysteries, and memories tucked away in garages, sheds, and fields across the country. Now, in this session, he'll share some of the most compelling human interest moments he's discovered while chasing down these automotive time capsules. So everyone, please welcome Tom Cotter back as he opens the door to A Barn Find Life. Tom.
By the way, afterwards I'll be signing copies of this book. It's the closest thing I'll ever do to an autobiography, Secrets of the Barn Find Hunter. So if you want to know about me, buy this book. And it'll be outside there somewhere. So to me, if I was up here talking about sheet metal and camshaft angles and, compression ratios, I bet there wouldn't be more than like two or three of you in here. To me, cars carry a story, a human interest story. And that's my biggest compliment I could get is when I'll be at a car show and a guy will come up to me, he's got a car display, and I like your show, and how about this GTO you found and an old Porsche? And then his wife will say, I never liked car shows, but I love your show. To me, that's the biggest compliment, when you can attract somebody to a story that doesn't have any interest in cars per se, but likes stories. So I've kind of coined myself a storyteller, and I'd rather tell stories about cars than anything else, because that's all I know. So I've been doing the Barn Find series for Haggerty this is our 11th year, which is amazing, because I've done a number of books, Cobra in the Barn, the Hemi in the Barn, the Vincent in the Barn. I did a number of books, and somebody from Haggerty called me 11 years ago, like right around now, probably in September, so another 2 months. And they said, Tom, we like your books, and we think they would do well in a video format. Have you ever thought about that? I said, no, I really hadn't, but I'll give it a shot. So I was doing a book on Route 66, finding cars along Route 66 from Chicago to LA, and I drove my 39 Woody wagon, and Haggerty had a bunch of vehicles following me with cameramen and producers and all that stuff. And somehow we muddled our way through. I don't even go back and look at those first few episodes because none of us really know what we're doing. But here we are 11 years later, still enjoying it, and I think we've gotten a little bit better. So, this is me, and that's Jordan Lewis. Jordan is, he started with Haggerty about 11 years ago. And so he has been with me since the beginning. So it's funny, I used to have 3 cameramen and a producer, and they'd have 2 Suburbans they'd drive around with. And, as money gets shorter and shorter, everybody's trying to trim. So now it's just Jordan. He's the producer, the cameraman. We have 1 cameraman, and he gets it. We kind of speak the same language. So that's us in a field in Virginia, right off I-77, at a place called Snowball Bishops. And he probably has 40 old Galaxies, 63, 64, 65 Galaxies. He's deceased now, but we've done a couple of episodes on him and the old race car that he had, the old Ford Coupe that Haggerty restored. So cars have stories, and if you dig deep enough, you'll find every car has a story, and I love the lengthier stories. I love your aunt bought this new, and you drove it to the prom, and she gave it to you when you got married. I love those kind of stories, but some cars don't have stories. So what kind of car is this? Corvette. It's a 54 Corvette. If you've ever driven down I-85 going towards Atlanta, as soon as you cross the South Carolina-Georgia line, there's a lake right there. Within 30 seconds, if you look sharp to the left, the car is in the woods right there, right there. You cross into Georgia and you look to the left and you'll see some sheet metal and stuff. Well, this is in that same group of cars. This is under a lean-to. It's a 54, the second year of the Corvette. It's fairly complete. He doesn't have the hubcaps. He might be missing a few other things, but there's no story. I mean, I was with the guy for half a day and would look at the Chevelle over there, and there's a Torino over there. But tell me about the Corvette. He says, you know, I got it. I traded a few cars for it. I said, what about? There's no story. So here's a great car with no story. And, you know, that's the kind of car. I try to stay away from junkyards because junkyards don't have stories. They have inventory. Whoever owns the junkyard, yeah, I'll sell you that part, but, you know, I don't know who owned it. So I like to go to somebody's house who knows intimately. And I compare it to this. If you were getting a golden retriever, you'd want to go to the house where it was raised, not to a pet store. Because the pet store, it's a generic dog. Golden retriever, you see where it was born. So this car had no story. But this car has a story. My whole life, I had been an enthusiast of a AC Cobra, probably like many of you in this room. I was 10 years old, and a friend of mine in 5th grade gave me a book cover, and it had sports cars on it. Remember, in my family, we covered our books with brown paper bags from the supermarket because they were free. But he was in the Woolworth store, and you know, there's Yale and Harvard and Princeton book covers, but then there was one sports cars, and he said, Mom, I think Tom would like that. So they bought it for me. And I covered one of my books with it, and you know, there was an Aston Martin and a Ferrari and a Lotus, whatever, but there was a car I had never heard of before. Now remember, this is 1964. I'm 10 years old. The Cobra had just come out, and I just fell in love with this car. I didn't know anything about it. I didn't know who Carroll Shelby was. I didn't know what kind of motor it had, but as a 10-year-old, I fell in love with that car. So it only took me 37 more years to be able to afford a Cobra. I didn't think, you know, the planets would align, because if I had $500, Cobras were $20,000, and when I had $20,000, Cobras were $200,000. I'm like, I'll never get there. But I had a business in the racing business in North Carolina, public relations and marketing business, and a company came along and said, we want to buy your business. I said, it's not for sale. We'll give you this much. I said, it's your business. And I went out and I told my wife it's Cobra time. And I bought a Cobra in Walnut Creek, California. And I invited my friend Peter Egan from Road and Track magazine to come along, and we drove 11 days across the United States. No agenda, no highways, no cities, just 2-lane roads, staying in little mom and pop hotels. When that story came out in February 2002, I got a call from a guy. Hi, Tom, this is Hugh Barger. I live next door to you. Oh, yeah, Barger Farm. Okay. Well, I'd never met him. Where I live in Davidson, North Carolina, big pieces of property, farms, but I shared a property line with him. He had cows on one side, and I had a lawn on the other. And he said, I love the story of Road and Track. I, too, am a Cobra enthusiast. I'd like to see it, and I'd like to show you what I have in the barn. Whoa. So I've been barn find hunting. You know, the term barn find hunting is much newer than, you know, I've been doing this since I'm 12, but it's a convenient term. I wish I had made it up. But I've passed this barn for 15 years at that point, on my way to Charlotte Motor Speedway going to work. But I know that, okay, most of the time I'm upset when I get into a barn, there's a pile of hay, there's an old pickup truck, or there's nothing there. And so he looked at my Cobra, and then he said, come on in the barn. And he showed me this. And this is an AC Greyhound. My car is an AC Cobra that's parked 50 feet away outside the barn. Oh my God, like really? So his father bought him for this when he went to graduate school. He went to Davidson College for undergrad. He went to graduate school in Washington, D.C., became an engineer, and this was the car he used every day, a 1963 AC Greyhound, which was the new direction that AC wanted to go in when sales of their sports cars started to die off. And because it was such a limited production car, I think less than 60 were built, they had a Bristol motor, which was developed by BMW for aircraft, and then AC made it the AC Bristol. It's an aluminum body, very similar to a Cobra as far as styling, but as you can see, it's a coupe. And because there were so few cars built, when the master cylinder went out, couldn't get a master cylinder, no spare parts. He parked it in the barn, and at this point, it had been there 50 years. It was sunk down in the dirt to the chassis, and he said, come over and take a look at it. And so my friend and I, who are both Cobra nuts, looked at the toolkit and looked at the jack and whatever, but you could see there were raccoon prints on it. There were mice living inside. And at least at the time, which this would have been 25 years ago, it was not worth restoring. These cars do not have a big audience. There's not a big group of people that want to buy AC Greyhounds. And it would cost so much money to restore this. Well, since that time, everything has gone up in value. And actually, Hugh Barger's daughter has just paid to have it restored, and it is fabulous. The car was originally silver with red interior, and it's restored that way, and it's fabulous. But still, they paid, it was a checkbook restoration. I think they paid about $300,000 to have it restored. It ain't worth that much. So it's still, be careful what you invest in, because it might be not a good investment. But, cool story. And so that afternoon, I had a phone call scheduled with my publisher at Motor Books International. And I said, Zach, what's the chance of this? I have a car built in Stowe, England, at AC Cars, and my next door neighbor has a car built by AC Cars in Stowe, England. What's the chance of this happening? Like, holy mackerel, that's pretty cool. And he said, Tom, I think there's a book there. I said, what do you mean? He said, finding old cars. And at the time, 25 years ago, the term barn find had been coined. He said, a book about barn finds. I said, well, that's my whole life, but I don't think anybody's interested in it. He said, if you'll take a chance on writing the book, I'll take the chance on publishing it. And bada bing, bada boom, those books are the reason I'm standing in front of you here today. So he had a lot of faith that I could translate and transmit that message to a larger audience. And so that's how I got here. So there's a story with, a car with a cool story. And, I know this car today, and it's beautiful. No, I should, but just close your eyes and imagine that in silver. And it's shiny and it's beautiful. I should have that. This is one of my two favorite stories. And remember, I've been doing this for 11 years with Hagerty, or 10 and a half years at this point. I got a call from a gentleman. Actually, Hagerty got a call from a gentleman, and they transferred. They said, Tom, we gave this guy your phone number. And he said, I've seen your show, and I think I'd like to talk to you. My mother has an old car in the garage, and she's in real bad financial shape. My dad died, and now, the burden of the house is on her shoulders, and she doesn't have any money. She's elderly, and I think, you could probably help her out selling this car. So we flew to Dallas, Texas. She lives in a suburb of Dallas, and I met Maria. And Maria was just the most wonderful woman. And so I'll tell you the story about Maria. Maria lived by herself in this house. Her son lived in Virginia, and he had his own job and career going on, whatever. But Maria grew up in Mexico City, and she was on a bus, a tour bus once, a Mexico City tour bus, and she sat next to him, a young man from Dallas. And over the course of a day, they talked, and then they'd stop and go look inside a church or look at, whatever they look at in Mexico City. And by the end of the day, they had struck up this nice conversation, and, so they exchanged phone numbers, as people did in those days, not email addresses. And that kind of infatuation continued. And so he went back to Texas, of course, and she was where she was. And ultimately, a year or so later, he proposed to her, and he wanted to get married. So he said that I have a white Porsche, and he found out her favorite color was orange. And so he sent her letters. Remember letters? I love letters. He sent her a letter with an orange pen in it, just a pen, but it was orange. And he said, I have a white Porsche. I'm going to paint it orange, and I'm going to pick you up for our wedding in it. And so, here I was in her living room. The car is in the garage. I haven't even seen the car yet. And I mean, she's sitting there with a photo album of her wedding, and here I'm dancing with my father, and here's my new husband and whatever. And then she goes to the closet, takes out her wedding dress, which is still in plastic. I mean, we're talking, this happened 50 years ago. Took out her wedding dress and showed me the big pen, and not the big pen, but the pen that was orange. She said, "He loved me so much, he painted the car this color." So she moved to Dallas, and he was an engineer. And they did things that young people did in those days with sports cars. They went on rallies and they doing tours. She told me they went to Colorado once with a sports car group and had all sorts of fun with their Porsche. But then he started to lose feeling in his hands and feet and ultimately wound up having ALS. And so the Porsche got parked, and until we pulled it out of there, I mean, it had been sitting for decades, and he passed away ultimately. She didn't have a driver's license, nor could she, would she have even driven this. But if you look, this pile of stuff right here, those are tablecloths and bed sheets, and she had that car covered, lovingly covered. If you look at this, even though the paint looks pretty bad, it's still shiny. Well, the car was clean as a whistle, and she had it covered, and she uncovered it for us. So this was probably the most valuable thing in her life and was going to be the last thing that she would let go. So I said, I can probably help you align you with an auction company, and we'll see what happens. So this episode came out, and I decided that Hershey would be a good auction to bring it to. Hershey had specialized in non-restored cars, preservation cars, RM auctions there. So we arranged for RM to come pick it up, and they got it running, which didn't take much at all. And so, it's an audience like you guys here, and I'm sitting here, and Maria's sitting here, and her son's sitting here, and she's got her arm through my arm. And, kind of hard guy auction people, give me another drink and all this stuff, right? So there's noise and commotion and stuff. But when this car came, the seats filled in and it got quiet because people had heard about this because of the episode, Barn Find Hunter. Can I hear 175,000, 200,000, 250,000? Well, she wound up getting $325,000 for it. And all those hard-ass auction people stood up and clapped. And she cried looking at the ceiling, and she said, "He's still looking out for me." It's like, oh my goodness. These are the stories that go hidden unless somebody kind of pries and gets those stories out of the sheet metal. So, a wonderful lady, she was able to, pay off her house and live in it. I haven't been in touch with her for a few years, so I'm not sure if she still lives there or not. But you can't make up stories like that. Some of you may know of this car because it got a lot of publicity and I had so much fun with it. But we were in Northville, Michigan doing Barn Find Hunter. Actually, I did a book about finding cars in Detroit. I spent 2 weeks in Detroit looking for cars in the inner city, in the outskirts, within 40 miles of Detroit, whatever. Well, this was in Northville, and I had heard rumors of a guy who lived there and got a job transfer to Manhattan. And he had a collection of Galaxies, R-code Galaxies. Well, R-code Galaxies and living in Manhattan don't go together. Never the twain shall meet. Like you could almost not have a car at all there. It's so difficult. So this was a storage building, and those garages, you rent them by the month. And he had, an R-code. An R-code would be a big block Galaxy, like a 427 or 428. A two-door, a convertible, a four-door, rare cars. But this was the rarest, and it's an R-code wagon. And so I did some research and found out from him the story of this car. This is a 1967 Ford Country Squire, like we all grew up in going to Dairy Queen. It has the seats in the back that fold up, and kids got sick in them because you get an equilibrium and all that stuff going on. Wood siding, just the way it should look, as if it had a 6-cylinder in it with a 3 on the tree. But this car had a 428 in it with a 4-speed manual gearbox, bucket seats, and a console. The only one ever made. So like, how the heck does this happen? So the story, and it's a great story. There was a young man who had a family in Ohio, and he had 3 kids, and they needed a new car. The family needed a new car. Well, all his friends had GTOs and Superbirds and Mustangs, and I want a muscle car. And his wife said, "You better not buy a muscle car. You better buy a wagon because we have kids and they need to go camping and to baseball games, whatever." So he goes to the Ford dealership. Now, I was a Ford salesman for 1 year, and I can tell you, a dealership is a lonely place a week before Christmas. Nobody's thinking about buying new cars. And so, there's all sorts of special bonuses if you can sell the car the last week, whatever. So this guy goes to the dealership, and he said, "Here's what I want to have." And I want a wagon, I want full, all the accessories, I want air conditioning and power steering and all that stuff. And I want a 428 and a 4. And the salesman says, let me check. So this is the days before computers. And you had to do little dots with a pen or a pencil. And you could do a 6-cylinder, you could do a 289, you could even do a 390, but you could only do it automatic, or maybe 3 on the tree, but you couldn't do a 428, you couldn't do a 4-speed. And so the salesman said, "I can't build this car for you. It's just impossible." He said, "Well, all right, well, I'll shop around. Maybe I'll come back after Christmas, whatever, So he left. The salesman got his number. And he goes back and tells the sales manager, "I could have sold one more." "You could sell one more car?" "Yeah." "What is it?" And he told me, he said, "Can't make it." He said, "You know what? Ford wants to sell cars as bad as we do going into Christmas." So he called up Dearborn, is the sales manager at Ford dealership, and worked his way up the pipeline. Finally gets to an executive, a young executive who broke all the rules, and his name was Lee Iacocca. He said, "Hell yes, we'll build that car." And they built one car, one 428, 4-speed, bucket seats, console car. And he got it and used it for what it was intended for. And then it went to another owner where it sat outside, sadly, for a lot of years, also in Ohio, in a driveway, and that's where the surface rust all got on there. And then the guy that had it in Northville, and I did an episode about it, and it's in my book, and it's in that book too. And a famous car. So I called my wife that night, because the deal is I find hundreds of cars a year. I don't buy them. I don't need any more cars. I've got a nice collection. But I said, "Honey, you know what? I love Fords. I love barn finds. I love station wagons." She said, "I get it. Okay, well, if you feel that strongly about it, buy it." So I asked, "What do you want for it?" And he told me. I said, "That's fair. I'm going to buy it." And I own this car. I don't own it now. I sold it during COVID, but I owned it for probably 5 years. And so much fun. So much fun. I'm on the board for McPherson College in Kansas, and I drove this car from North Carolina to Kansas for the board meeting with a surfboard on the roof. And you want to get strange looks in Kansas, you go to a gas station with a surfboard on the roof. Are you lost? You're about 2,000 miles in the wrong direction. And then, you had to be pretty secure in your life, because, you go to a gas station and anybody, a car enthusiast or anybody that's young, "Hey, dude, you're the coolest, man. That's so cool. Never fix it up." And then you'd see a mother with children in a minivan. "Don't look. He lives in that car. He's a homeless man." So it was a car that kept producing stories as life went on. I did a fair amount of work to it. If you remember, if you know about, it's a chassis, body on chassis car, and there's rubber biscuits between the body and the chassis to insulate vibration and noise, and those things had rusted through. So the big job was pulling the body off the frame, and we jacked it up about a foot above the frame, and so I had a guy go and weld those things. So I did that stuff. But things like, the tailgate folded down and opened sideways. It had that split hinge, and that thing was broken. The tailgate window didn't work. There were so many little things, I just didn't have the time to pursue it. So during COVID, I got rid of a few cars. And I got rid of this one. And, I could feel bad about it, but I sold it to a guy who's as enthusiastic about the car as I am. And he fixed all those little things. And now he gets invited to concours. He was at Amelia Island with the car. This thing has now picked up a whole new life. And it's pretty darn cool. So, and it's all thanks to a young man in Ohio and Lee Iacocca that this car even exists. So when we do Barn Find Hunter episodes, it's almost like we throw a dart at a map. Where do you want to go next? It's not quite that, but I don't want to be very programmed or strategic. I just want to I have this fantasy of flying from North Carolina to California and looking out the window, and you see those little towns at 33,000 feet, little town that big. I have this fantasy that I'm going to ask the flight attendant, can you ask the pilot what town that is, and then fly back and drive or whatever to that town and look for cars in that town that I discovered. So one day, you may see that on Barn Find Hunter because it's on my radar. But we were in San Diego and we had just filmed really good bunch of episodes in Southern California, and so I had 3 cameramen and a producer and me, and we're sitting on having dinner outdoors on a dock in San Diego. The sun's going down. I mean, things were pretty nice. And they said, Tom, where do you want to go next? I want to go to Midland, Texas. So, here's a bunch of 20-somethings. Why would you want to go there? We certainly don't want to go there. Well, Midland, Texas is in western Texas. It's a desert. It's grimy and gritty. But why would I want to go to Midland, Texas? Anybody here know? Oil? No, not oil. Dry? Well, that's a good reason, but that's not why I want to go to Midland, specifically Midland. A guy named Jim Hall built race cars there called Chaparrals in the 60s. They were Can-Am cars, and they were the most exotic race cars at the time in the world. Suction, he had motors like snowmobile engines that sucked the cars down to the pavement so they wouldn't spin out, and aerodynamics, and just amazing. Jim Hall was part of an oil family, so he had money, and then General Motors gave him a lot of assistance with aluminum engine blocks and things. Why Midland? So I wanted to go to Midland and see why and where the Chaparrals were made. And so we found the old Chaparral headquarters. They had their own racetrack in the back called Rattlesnake Raceway. They let me drive my Woody around that racetrack, and they said, if you go off the track, stay in your car, because it's called Rattlesnake Raceway for a reason. And, boy. So there was only one race held there, an SCCA race back in the 60s, and I think somebody died in it. So it's only been a test track, and now it's just sitting there with tumbleweeds. But I wanted to go experience why, and, Jim Hall, where he lived or whatever. And it's interesting, the Bush family, George Bush Sr. was a wildcatter before he got into politics. You can go right to their home, There's the Bush family home, which was quite humble, probably 1,200, 1,400 square feet, and it's open for tours. So after I saw Chaparral cars, you can go to the Petroleum Museum, which is in the next town, and you can see the Chaparrals on display in the museum. And then we went riding around looking for cars like we usually do. Now, I'm not like American Pickers where I post on social media, we're coming to Midland, Texas, show us what you got. I like to ride around up and down streets and talk to people. And if you find one old car person, they'll tell you about another old car person. And before you know it, 5 days of shooting and you've got all these episodes. So we went cruising around industrial parks and neighborhoods and whatever. And we came across this metal building, and this metal building in the front, it was a pool company. They built pools. Now, Midland, Texas, interesting place. In the middle of the desert, it's dirty, it's grungy, lots of potholes. There's no weight limit on the amount of weight trucks and trailers can carry on the roads. Like some places, you can't, that's too heavy. But there, they don't care. So they have to, part of the whole fracking industry is mud. They have to get mud and pack these mines and stuff with mud. So they haul these 3 tractor-trailer loads of mud behind one truck, and all the roads are rutted. You don't see a car. There's no cars there. Pickup trucks, hundreds, thousands of pickup trucks, and everybody makes a lot of money. I have a friend who used to own a racing team, John Meekum. He lives in Houston, an old oil man. I said, what is it about Midland? He said, well, it's a place you can go to as a young person with no money, make $1 billion, lose it, and have a good chance to make it back again. Wow, interesting. So, now this is a few years ago. To stay in Hampton was $450 a night. Barbers made $250,000 a year, a barber to cut hair. Everything there was so expensive because why would you be a barber if you could be an oil man and make lots of money? So everybody's got a pool because everybody lives there, has money. And this guy, Tom Cross, who's looking at the car there, he installs pools, but he's also a big car enthusiast. So he had, his business, his building, but in the back he had a field full of old cars that he's dragged in over the decades, just cars he liked. So we were walking around, the cameraman, and I'd look at, oh, here's a 240Z, and there's an old Rambler, and this station wagon, 62 Ford wagon, and it's not a ranch wagon, it was a country sedan. Country sedan meant no wood siding, kind of a stripper. And then I'd look at, there's a 53 Ford over here, and there was an old, something GM over here, and I'd go back to this car. I said, man, this thing is pretty darn solid. What's the story with it? He said, I dragged it in from Colorado, decades ago. I said, this is solid. He said, yeah, but, I'm selling that property. These cars have to go. If I can't sell them, I'm going to just crush them. But he didn't want to do that. So I said, now you might remember this, but there was a commercial for Simon Eyes when I was a kid, and the guy went to a desert junkyard and a can of Simon Eyes and, got an old dingy car like this, and the commercial showed that he was able to make this old car shine like $1 million. I said, Tom, do you have a rag and some compound? He said, yes. He goes in the building, comes out, he's got this rag compound. And I just polished a little piece on the other fender where he is. On the other fender about that big, it's like, this is original paint. And I could see my reflection. I said, man, do you have a buffer? He says, well, I have a buffer, but I don't have an extension cord this long. So he goes, gets his forklift and moves the Rambler and moves the Datsun and moves it, and he brings us right to the building, and suddenly you can see the extension cord under the car. And I started to buff out that fender. Oh my goodness. I mean, this car's been sitting in the desert for 50 years at least, and the fender shined up. I said, Tom, this car doesn't want to die. Let's talk about this car. And I thought, and I had the Haggerty people there. I said, I think we should buy this as a Haggerty project and donate it to some charity. I mean, and I would love to be involved with this. So he worked out a deal. He sold it to us for $500, and he said, okay, you can have the car. It doesn't have an engine, doesn't have a transmission. I'll give you a rebuilt engine and a rebuilt transmission, and my friends will come and work on the car so that when it leaves here, it'll be a running, driving car. So we bought it, and a year later, it finally left. But in that year, he and his friends worked on it in that shop, and I would fly in a couple of times with students from McPherson College in Kansas. They would drive and I'd fly in, and we'd work on this car. And, so they made seat covers out of a Mexican blanket, and it had put dual exhaust. A 390 with dual exhaust sounds so good. They got the Ford-O-Matic rebuilt, put cool wheels on it. His car club donated disc brakes for the front. And a year later, we decided, because McPherson was involved in this car, students would come down on their weekends off to work on this car. And McPherson's 1,000 miles away from Midland, Texas. So the students would drive down 1,000 miles and another 1,000 miles back. A year later, that's the car. Look at that original paint. Oh my goodness. Those are the companies that donated parts for Dynamat and carburetor companies, whatever. And so we drove it 1,000 miles up to McPherson, doing barn find hunter episodes along the way. And then we got there, the president of the college and all the students, yay, and there's confetti in the air, and they were taking rides around the campus in this car. This car is now their parts chaser. If they got to run to the machine shop or auto parts store, whatever, they had an old Chevy Love pickup truck that it was on the last leg, so this car replaced it. And then since then, students have been using this car, and they've been fixing it up. A student made his senior project restoring the interior in this car to concours condition. I mean, if you remember this era of cars, they had seats with red and white seats with almost a stainless steel panel in them, or chrome, and all sorts of cool stuff. The interior is fabulous. And so it continues to live a happy life in McPherson, Kansas. And this car came probably within a couple of months of being crushed. What kind of car is that? Well, it's either a Superbird or a Daytona, and I don't remember. But you know? Oh, I thought you raised your hand. I don't remember what it was, but I was just talking to somebody about this. I don't know if he's in this room. I talked to somebody about this location. Oh, it's the guy with Augie Duesenberg out there. He said, this is the best barn find hunter episode ever. I had heard about this guy in Pittsburgh, North Carolina, about 2.5 hours from where I live. And he was very secretive, but I knew somebody that knew him. And I said, would you find out, if I could go there with a camera? And so he called me back and said, I just met with him, and you can go there without a camera because he wants to meet you first. And if he likes you and what you do, maybe you can bring a camera back. And so I went there, and I had to go through a kind of an initiation. He and his wife were Seventh-day Adventists, and so I had to hear his little talk about that. And he gave me new magazines and books and stuff. Okay, I'll look at it. He said, well, now let's go look at the cars. And this guy had buildings and buildings like this all over his property. He probably owned, how many acres? I don't know, 20, 50, I don't know how many acres. But as a young man, his father had a body shop on the property. He worked in the body shop and was a auto shop teacher at a local high school. He fell in love with muscle cars. And during the gas crisis, remember, I used to push my Pinto up to the gas pump so I didn't use too much gasoline idling. Well, he had the financial wherewithal to be able to buy big block Chevelles and Corvettes and Superbirds, of which he owned about 5 or 6 of, Superbirds / Daytonas. And he said, people say to me, oh, this was some investment. He said, I didn't buy these for an investment. I bought them because I loved them. I was a NASCAR fan, and I fell in love with those cars and the drivers, and if I could afford to buy it and own it, that's all I wanted to do. And so he never stopped. And so he would buy a car that might need work because he was a body man. He painted it. He had the engines all restored, the interior's done, new tires, put it in a barn. Next. Well, he's probably got 100 cars there now, and he's got 5 or 6 of these Superbirds. Torino Talladega and a Dan Gurney edition Mercury, and lots of Jaguar XK120s, 140s, 150s, Jaguar E-types. He's a big Lincoln guy, mostly Lincoln 3-window coupes, like 38 maybe, 38 and 40s Lincolns. He has the Lincoln that was in The Godfather that was shot up at the toll booth, if you remember the machine gun. He's got that Lincoln with all the bullet holes in it. He's got a Corvette. Now, the years, like an 84 Corvette, nobody wanted a Corvette in 84. They had no horsepower. They had like 185 horsepower. So the dealership near him, which is like 9 miles away, wanted to sell his Corvette. So they sold it to him below cost, and he drove it like 2 miles. 9 miles, and it had 2 miles on it. So the car's a 40-year-old car sitting there with 11 miles on it. It's still got plastic on the seats, plastic on the floors, plastic door panels, no mileage. A number of Corvettes. I just go through it. I should have a printed list of what he has, but if he filled up a building, he'd build another building. The buildings were not heated or air conditioned. They had no insulation. So when I went in there, the cars were sweating because it was warm outside, still cool inside, and all his good work that he's done for 50 years is getting undone. The tires are flat, there's mice in them, little bubbles of rust coming out. There's a Pantera over there and it's got rust bubbles. Like, oh man. I said to him, what are you gonna do with these cars? Well, none are for sale. I said, well, I don't want to buy any. But he was a very old, mid to late 70s. Probably having been exposed to paint sprays and thinners and all that bad stuff. He was very older in his days, but his father was like 100, and his father was there too. Holy mackerel. So I'm sure his father is now deceased. What are you going to do with these cars? He said, well, I don't know. So I talked to his wife, and she said, she was a wonderful lady. In fact, when I went there, he had just said to me, now you shouldn't come that day. It's my wife's birthday. And I hear her in the background, no, it's okay, he can come. So I went there with a bundle of flowers. I said, and I got on my knee, I said, happy birthday. So, you got to do corny stuff like that if you want to get in the barn, So she loved me, but she had no interest in these cars. He had 2 daughters who had no interest in cars. I think one was a teacher, one was something else. But someday, I felt like saying, and I see this a lot in my travels as being a barn find guy, is that a I want to tell somebody something, but I can't. Like, it's not my position to start an argument with somebody or give advice. I'm there to report the news and go. But I want to say, right now, you could pick the next owner of that car. But once you're gone, you can't pick that next owner, and it might go to somebody you don't like or whatever. But I can't do that. So it's going on my mind. Trust me, I see insanity a lot, and I'm not saying that in a comical way, but I went to a building in Montana, a warehouse just totally stuffed with cars. Buick Rivieras, every era of Buick Riviera you could imagine, but just clutter and crap on top of them. And he said, I have a Corvette. I said, you have a Corvette? I don't see it, because it was so cluttered. He says, well, you got to slide through this Buick, and it's on the other side, the Riviera. So I had to open the door. There was no steering wheel or steering column, and slide through, open the other door, and get out to look at the Corvette. And I said, oh, there's a mattress, pillows, and blankets and stuff here. Oh, I'm sorry. Somebody lives here? He said, yeah, I do. Wow. See, he slides through a car every day to go to bed, and he slides through that car again, and he's right next to the Corvette, which I couldn't see until I got over there. So I see a lot of this. And he told me, I really need to, at the beginning of my visit, I got to start getting rid of this stuff. I don't need this. He was probably 70 at the time or whatever, and he's been buying this stuff since he was a kid. I think his first car was a Riviera that he bought as a high school student. And he had other cars too, Model A's and Model T's and things. I need to start getting rid of this stuff. I'm not going to live forever. I'm not going to restore all these cars. No, you're not. You're not. But by the time I was getting ready to leave, he said, hey, if you see anything you think I might like, let me know. Here's my number. And I bump into that more and more. So Bill Warner from Amelia Island, who some of you may have heard of, Bill Warner, good guy. He knows I'm into this weird stuff. And there was a sports car built called the Woodhill Wildfire. It was a fiberglass sports car built on probably a Ford chassis. This is the dream all of us had in the 50s and 60s, build your own sports car out of a junker. And it was a fiberglass body on a Ford chassis with a Lincoln motor or whatever it was. He said, I know where one is. It's right here. It's near Columbia, South Carolina. So we're cruising around in the Woody. I said, I think I know where is this weird fiberglass car. So I find it there and met this guy, Bob. And Bob said, hey, can I help you? I said, yeah, well, Bill Warner told me. Oh, Bill Warner, yeah, he's a good guy. Well, this is my Woodhill Wildfire. I bought it when I was a kid. I was going to restore it, get it running, but I never did. But he had cars all over the place. I remember he had a 912 Porsche and a bunch of old BMW 2002s. And he had stuff all over. He kind of wheeled and dealed a little bit. And so we met him. The thing about driving a Woody is that, like, if I drove a new black Chevy pickup truck into some guy's yard, I'm not an old car guy. I'm a dealer. I'm a poser. You drive a 39 Ford into somebody's yard, they take you seriously. Suddenly, come on in, have some iced tea. Suddenly you're a car person, they're a car person, and that's the kind of the bonding episode. So I drive an old car. So people tend to believe you're authentic if you drive an old car. And so we looked at all this stuff, and we're done filming there. He said, okay, there's a big metal building right there, maybe a 50 by 50 metal building. He said, okay, put all your cameras down, your cell phones, put them all down, and we're going to walk in that building over there. He said, it's my father's building. It's filled with all his stuff, and I promised him I'd never take him in there, but you guys are cool. And so we walk inside this building, and it was poorly lit, and it was like a hoarder's nightmare. I mean, you had to walk sideways to get around the drill press, and there's an old Chevy van over here, and then you go this way, all filthy, because it's all dusty. And so we he said, go back in the corner. There's a car covered up in the corner. Don't take the cover off. And so we go back to the corner. There was 4 of us, no cameras. He said, okay, lift the cover off. And it's a Gullwing Mercedes, 300 SL. Oh my God. I mean, we're in barbecue country, South Carolina, outside of Columbus. what's a car like this doing here? He said, well, my father I think it was about a 61 Gullwing, or 60. It was candy apple red. And he said, in the mid 60s, my father had some extra money, and this was available for $3,000. And we went down to Atlanta. It was my mother, my father, my brother, and I drove back with my father in this Gullwing. They went to a place called Downing Motors. If you ever followed racing in the more recent years, Jim Downing was an IMSA champion. He kind of spearheaded rotary-powered Mazda race cars and stuff. Well, his father had a place in downtown Atlanta. He did repairs on the bottom floor of a big building. It was an old dealership, and they had an elevator to bring you to level 2, 3, and 4, which was cars for sale. And this Gullwing was in the Downing Motors place, and his father bought it. He drove it around for, a decade or so as a play car, and it's hidden in that back corner. Okay, you can cover it now. And so we're getting ready to leave, and he said, just someday I'll give you a call, and you can come back and have your cameras on. But I promised my father, as long as he's alive, nobody can do that. So I feel so privileged to be brought into people's lives like that. They trust me. So we're getting ready to leave. He said, there's one more car. Really? The sun's starting to go down. And so there's one more car. Well, tell me about it. Well, it's about 4 miles from here. I bought a piece of property, and on that property is a barn, and in that barn is a Cadillac. And it's kind of cool. Yeah, what the heck? We're not going to film anymore today, finding any other cars, so it's just going to be the hotel room, an early dinner and go to the hotel. Yeah, so we go there and we follow like kind of a deer trail back into the woods, and there's a barn, and the Cadillac's right there. There's no doors on the barn. There's the Cadillac. He said, I bought this property. The car was there. It looked so good. I didn't want to touch it. I said, how long have you owned it? He said, I don't know, 25 years. And so I walked up. What do? You look at a car at a car show or at a supermarket. You look in the window. I don't know where you look in the window to see if it's an automatic or a manual. But I was stepping on these crunchy things. I looked down, and they're bones, like little bones. Well, I look inside there, and I didn't see a manual transmission or automatic. I saw buzzards living in there, and they flew out of all the broken windows. I was a buzzard's house, right? And suddenly it made sense. Buzzards are dragging in mice and rats and stuff, and I'm stepping on their skeletons. So anyway, I look at the car, and then we just stood back and looked at it. I said, there's not enough money in the world to restore a car like this. Never mind what the chrome bill would be. And I don't remember. I think it's a 46. Very similar to like the last Cadillacs before World War II, 46, 47, something like that. So we're getting ready to leave again. I said, hey, wait a minute. Does that have an overhead valve or a flathead? He said, I've never opened it. I don't know. So the hood latch there, it's like, and he lifts it up, and he's owned this car 25 years, right? So, and the hood is so huge. It's like a dinghy, like a boat almost or something. So he lifts it up, and all these leaves come pouring out. And do you ever see a possum? And I see these leaves fall out, and then there's possum. I'm standing right there, and the possum looks at me with those teeth. This is my leg. I'm running around screaming like a girl. My camera crew is laughing their asses off at me, and he braved it. But, so we not only interrupted the home of buzzards, but also a possum that lived under the hood. So it was a good day. So, and a half hour before that, we see a Gullwing Mercedes. Doesn't make sense. I always thought that this was a really cool picture. I think like an Andy Warhol kind of picture. Anti-establishment, throwing a Lincoln out in the dumpster. But we had gone to St. George, Utah. I'm still on target here, so kind of. 116, I'm doing okay. So we went to St. George, Utah. Why? Because Ben, with Haggerty, said, I always wanted to go to St. George, Utah. They have backpacking there and skiing and whatever. And I said, fine, whatever. So, the Woody, we shipped the Woody there. I don't drive the Woody everywhere. I mean, if we go to California, I ship it. If I'm around the East Coast, I drive it. We had the Woody shipped there, and it was waiting for me. And we just jump in, and I just hit the ground running, like drive up and down roads, looking at people's backyards. The first car is the toughest one, and after that, you got to make. So a guy comes up to me. I'm at a traffic light, and he's sitting in a car. He said, "You're the barn find hunter." I said, "Yeah, you know any old cars?" "Yeah, in my driveway." So we follow him, and he's got an old Volkswagen Squareback. Okay, well, it's not, it's good. It's a good car. And we did a little piece on his Volkswagen Squareback. He had a cool story with it. I said, "Can you tell me anybody else?" "Oh, yeah, this guy's a hot rodder, and, they're over there, and they're over there." So everybody to a person said, "Too bad you can't get into Reds." "What's Reds?" "Well, it's a junkyard. Can't get in there." "Okay." Well, I meet this hot rodder and just about to leave. "Too bad you can't get into Reds." "Reds? Why is everybody talking about Reds?" So after about 3 days of doing these little minor finds of squareback Volkswagens and things, I said, "Well, I got to find out what Reds is." So it turns out Reds is on the north side of town. And so I go out there, and it's a concrete fence. You can kind of see it over there. But there's a concrete wall all around, 20 acres. I'm talking, it's like maybe 7 feet tall. So I pull up right next to the fence, and I look. I stand up on the running board of the Woody, and I could barely look over, and there's a junkyard full of basically rust-free cars that people would care about, old GTOs and just pretty cool stuff, Chevelles and Camaros and stuff. Man. So I found out that Reds hasn't opened to the public for 25 years. He's just a crabby old man. Don't talk to him. Don't. And these are people who are hot rodders, who have lived in this town their whole lives, who have always heard about Reds but never gone there because he's not open. So I look over there, and there's an old tow truck, and it just says Reds Towing, and it had a phone number on it. And I go, doot, 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 doot. And it didn't say, "Hi, this is Reds," or leave a message. It just went beep. I'm not sure. Is it going to record me, or did it just discount me? I said, "Hi, this is Tom Cotter. I'm driving around town in a '39 Ford Woody wagon looking for old cars, not to buy, but just to find and document them with a film crew. If you have the ability to, meet us, I'd love to meet with you." And I gave him my phone number. And at 10 o'clock that night in my hotel room, the Hampton Inn, "Hi, Tom, this is Red. I saw your Woody riding around town today." See, there's a good reason to drive an unusual car. "I saw your Woody today. Meet me at 9 o'clock at the yard." And we got there at 9 o'clock, and he opened the gate, pulled the Woody in, and then we had a minivan, pulled the minivan in, closed the gate, and I met one of the nicest human beings I've met in my life. A guy that had been branded as a crabby old guy. He told us his wife had died recently, within the last 18 months or so. And he was lonely, and he had too many cars, and it was probably time for him to start letting some of this stuff go. And he said, "Go anywhere you want, ask any question you want, don't have me on camera. I don't want to be filmed, I don't want to be interviewed, nothing. But if you have any questions," because he had a bad leg, "if you have any questions, my friend Jimmy here will walk around with you, and because he knows these cars as well as I do." Jimmy worked at a starter motor and alternator rebuilder nearby, real nice guy, and we were there for hours. But like I said, junkyards don't have stories; they have inventory. "Oh, this is a nice Chevelle. What can you tell me about it, Jimmy?" "Well, I don't know. It's probably been here since I've been born or whatever." You can't get stories out of inventory. So, we filmed there as best we could. It was still interesting. Lots of good muscle car potential, lots of very good sheet metal. And Red was willing to start parting with this stuff, and Jimmy was going to be his contact man. And so we went back out to the office. Red was there, and we shook his hand and shook Jimmy's hand. And thanks so much. Thanks. And I gave him my card. And it's a great day. Everybody around town said you'd never show us this stuff, and I feel like I've somehow not only gained access, but I gained a friend. And he said, "I feel the same way." And so flew back to North Carolina, and about a week later, I get a call from Jimmy, "Tom, Red died." I said, "What?" He said that his daughter was calling him this morning, calling him, no answer. She went over there, and he was on the kitchen floor, and he said, "And your business card was on the counter." He said, after you guys left, Red's biggest regret was telling you couldn't film him because he had such a good time and knew you guys were not going to exploit him. He wished that he had been taped and be a part of this show. And I said, oh, Jimmy, I'm sorry. I know, because he lost a friend. And anyway, I hung up. I said, oh, man. So I called Jordan at Haggerty, and I said, Red died. No, we were just there. No, I mean, it's not right. And I said the biggest regret he had was that nobody took a picture of him. And Jordan says, oh, man, let me look at our files. And when Red wasn't paying attention, Jordan snapped a picture of him. And if you look at that man, look at his skin, look at his ruddy face, that's a hard-working American. And when I told Jimmy that we had a photo of Red, 10 minutes later his daughter called, crying on the phone hysterically. I sent her this photo by email, sent it to Jimmy. Jimmy sent it to her, and she called crying that, you know, since my mother died, my father's just been lonely, doesn't want to talk to anybody, and you guys brought a breath of fresh air to him during that day that he loved so much. And so she wound up using this photo in the obituary in the town newspaper and at the funeral card at the funeral home. And so, you know, doing something illegally sometimes is the right thing to do. And we've kind of fulfilled his dream of being part of the show. One of the more famous Barn Find episodes, I live in North Carolina. Am I doing more time? Am I okay? If anybody has to leave, I'm 7 minutes over right now. I live in North Carolina, and if you're in North Carolina, if you're in Charlotte, the right neighborhood is Myers Park. Myers Park is where the doctors live, the lawyers live, the bank CEOs live. It's the right side of town. I get a call from a guy, and he says, my friend lives in Myers Park. His house is about to be condemned by the city. It's going to be torn down. He's got a bunch of cars in the garage, and I have no way to get them out of there. Can you help me? So I go over there, open this garage door. Another story, right? Built this garage 42 years ago and hasn't been in it since. A man and his fiance bought a house in Myers Park, started to restore it, rolls of carpeting, you know, doing scaffolding inside, sheetrock work, an old house they were restoring, and then they broke up. And wherever she went, he certainly didn't go in the same direction. He fell into a deep depression that really, for the rest of his life, he never got out of. And you know what happens when the roof starts leaking? Then it goes into the ceiling, and the sheetrock crashes down, and there's black mold all over the house. And what a sad case. And this garage, he had his cars in. So, starting with this one right here, this is a Morgan. It's a V8 Morgan with a propane engine to make it legal for U.S. ownership. Had the derivative of the 15 aluminum block Buick engine in there. That's a TR6 Triumph with 6,000 miles on it that this guy, Alan, bought new, and he drove it to college. The red car in the background is a big block Cobra. I say a 427, but it was actually one of the 100 428 cars that Carroll Shelby built. And a Ferrari 275 GTB long nose alloy body. And then a BMW X sedan, a four-wheel drive sedan. And so we had to get these cars out of there because literally the town is just going to crash the house and the garage down. So we got a storage building. I brought my trailer and some friends, and we pushed these cars out. Well, these cars were mouse hotels. I opened the glove box for the Cobra, and it was all filled like with insulation and pieces of shag carpeting, and it was like a little mouse apartment. And then I opened the trunk, and it was a mouse condominium. There were mice running all over the place in there. Same with the Ferrari. This was an amazing episode. The friend who called me said, my friend Alan would like to see if he can get what he paid for these cars. I said, when did he buy them? He said, 42 years ago. I said, whoa. He paid $42,000 for the Cobra and $47,000 for the Ferrari. I said, well, I think we can do better than that. And so I got in touch with all the auction companies. I said, this is going to be the auction of Amelia Island. Gooding, Bonham, RM, and who's the other one? Which one? Broad Arrow. Broad Arrow wasn't around then. Okay. Yeah, it was. Anyway, there were 4 auctions at Amelia, and it was Gooding that wound up making the best deal. Look, we'll pick these cars up, we'll pay for the shipping of them, we'll get them running, we'll represent them, we'll give you this much, yeah, we'll cut our commission down, whatever. So they wound up getting them. So these cars got a lot of publicity. They didn't get cleaned up at all, but they got running. And here we are at the Gooding auction with Alan, who was not in good shape, being escorted around by Warren, his good friend, and bidding, boop, 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 how much here, how much there. The Cobra won for $950,000 plus commissions. It was $1 million car. The Ferrari went for $2.5 million plus commission. So, Alan was able to live his final years comfortably. He didn't live in this house. He lived in another hovel somewhere else, and the guy was loaded. So the Morgan and the Triumph were in storage until just a few weeks ago, and they went to his nephew and niece. So, that's all done, but wow. I mean, this was in a part of Charlotte where the lawn had turned into bushes, had turned into trees that you couldn't see the house from the road. And the house was not far from the road. So, and I guarantee you, this is not the only place in the country that's like this. So he had all those cars that I let everybody in the world know about through Barn Find Hunter. What I didn't let anybody know about was he had one more Cobra in another location. And it was a 289 Cobra in a storage unit about 3 miles away from that house that you just saw. And he said, Tom, I think you need to own this car one day. But I never saw it. He said, I lost the key to the storage unit and whatever. And so, 6 months go by, a year go by, several years go by, Alan died. Well, his nephew called me and said, Tom, my uncle died, but he always thought that you should wind up with this car. So I'm going to get it appraised, and you make me an offer, and we'll come out in the middle. So that's my newest project. It's the 429th Cobra built, 289. It was British Racing Green from the factory. It'll be British Racing Green again. And I'm actually writing a story about the restoration of this car, and hopefully it's going to wind up at the Amelia Island Concours lawn one day. So I do buy them occasionally. The barn find of my lifetime. And I didn't bring the right hat with me. I have a yellow hat that I wear a lot, and it says Lime Rock on it. I race at Lime Rock. And I'm at my favorite coffee shop in Booth Bay Harbor, Maine, which is where I live in the summer. And I'm online. There's a guy behind me, taps me on the shoulder. Do you race at Lime Rock? I said, yeah, I do. Oh, I used to race at Lime Rock. Really? What'd you race? So we go over that little table over there. We get our scones and our coffee, and we become friends. And he says, there's a guy over on River Road. I know River Road. It's a good driving road about 10 miles from where we were. He's got a GT40. Whoop, 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 radar. And so he told me where this guy lived. This guy who I had met was a fine woodworker. He did all sorts of ornamental, beautiful woodwork, trim work, staircases. And he told me where he lived. So right after breakfast, I went over there. And I'm driving a new F-150. So I look up, and he's right across from Scully's Oysters. And a long driveway, paved, but not very well kept, lots of leaves. And I said, I'm not going to drive my pickup truck up there for the reasons I just told you. So the next day I went back. I have a car called a Cunningham, built by Briggs Cunningham, one of 25 of the street cars that he had built with a big Hemi engine. And it's a barn find. I leave it that way, and I drive it. And it's pretty cool. So I drove that up the driveway, and I walk up to the door. It's a big barn in the back. I get ready to knock, and there's a sign. Do not knock on the door. Call this number, we'll call you back. Crap. So I take my phone out, I take a picture of the little card with the phone number, and I'm getting ready to leave, and a lady comes to the door and says, can I help you? No. She says, what kind of car is that? I said, it's a Cunningham. I've never heard of a Cunningham, but I bet my husband has. Where's your husband? Bring him out. I said, well, he's in a wheelchair inside. He can't come out, but come on inside. And that became my friendship with Tom and Sally Powers. Tom was born in the right family and was able to pursue all the automotive interests he ever wanted. And he grew up on Long Island, Locust Valley, good friends with a guy named Bill Wonder. Some people here might remember the name Bill Wonder, who owned the third GT40 ever made. And ultimately retired to Maine and brought his car collection with him. And I didn't buy this car. This is the car of my dreams, GT40. Oh my God, the car of my dreams. I wish I had, because Tom, who got, every year I go back to Maine in the summer, he got sicker and sicker. Strokes, cancer, heart attack. But I put him in my Cobra once. I have a 289 Cobra, another one. And I said, Sally, we'll be back in a few hours. And this is the first time Tom had been out of the house except to go to the hospital in a long time. So we carried him out. He was a bundle of bones, put him in, strapped him in, and we went 100 miles an hour. We got ice cream and saw Pemaquid Lighthouse all within that time period. And that was probably the last time we went out of the house, because not long after that he passed away. But before he did, he let me go in the barn in the back because he trusted me. And he had cars back there piled with old boxes. And why do people do this? Why do people leave the windows open in cars and decide to park it for 30 years? But it is what it is. He let me see the cars, and so Sally said, you really want that GT40? I said, yeah, I really do. But I can't afford it now. Maybe in a year or so, because I'm selling a business. She said, well, I'll hold it for you. You would do that? Yeah. Wow. Sally died 4 weeks after he died. She had undiagnosed pancreatic cancer and had not taken care of herself because she was taking care of Tom. So I get a call from the niece and said, my Aunt Sally died too. I said, oh, crap, really? She said, and I got left the responsibility of dispersing this estate. My uncle didn't like anybody, and he thought the world of you, and my aunt said I could trust you with anything, so I need your help. So I spent half last summer tearing apart a barn that a hoarder occupied, Tom, and helping clean out the house that Sally occupied. You couldn't walk through the house because piles of stuff. 13 huge dumpsters to clean this place out. Anyway, I didn't buy the GT40. A friend bought it, but I bought that. A 930 Porsche Turbo with 15,000 miles that he bought new. I bought that, an MGTC that his father bought new in 1948, and that's my Maine car. I keep it on the coast of Maine and cruise to Owl's Head Museum with it, or British car shows. It's unrestored, one owner, and I feel so lucky. It cleaned up so nicely. In addition to a Lotus Elan, an Indy car, a Lotus Indy car that Jimmy Clark may have finished second at Indy with in 1963, a Corvette, an Indian motorcycle, and her niece said, my uncle would be so happy that you're buying these cars, that they wound up going to somebody. So this is me, looking for the next horizon of old cars. They're all over. If anybody tells you there's no cars left, don't believe them. I'm finding them every day. Thank you very much. And if you have any questions, you can ask me now, ask me later. I'm going out to sign books right now. They make good gifts for people. Christmas time's not far away.